White House also remains on the defense when it comes to their handling of the Epstein files. What's the latest there?
Yeah, Craig, over the weekend in a letter sent to Congress, Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Justice Department has released all of the millions of the Epstein files required by law. But some lawmakers are arguing that release is still insufficient and that there are still crucial files missing.
And then it all unraveled for her during a recent hearing. She walked in all set to defend her stance, saying she's given up everything the DOJ has on Epstein. But a Republican prosecutor, someone who should be backing her up, stepped up with some solid proof that contradicted her. This prosecutor pulled out a list of specific documents like internal memos, draft indictments, and even DOJ emails that Bondi was supposed to have handed over according to the law. Bondi was left speechless as everything she claimed just came crashing down live on TV. This is a big deal, especially since she's been leaning on this "I've released everything" argument for weeks now.
The DOJ also provided a long list of more than 300 high-profile names mentioned in the files, but critics from both parties are calling that decision a way to muddy the waters and to distract from who really is a predator. Craig.
Gabe Gutierrez from the White House. Gabe, thank you.
To have someone from her own party expose that as false, that's a real blow. That decision, a way to muddy the waters and to distract from who really is a predator. Craig, Gabe Gutierrez from the White House gave now back to the story. Bondi actually sent that letter to Congress on February 14th. So there's this big drama around Pam Bondi and the Epstein files that the Department of Justice holds. Bondi confidently declared that they had released everything required under the Transparency Act, even providing a list of around 340 names from the documents. She basically wrapped it up with, "We're done. There's nothing else. Just stop asking."
Attorney General Pam Bondi announcing in a letter to Congress that all of the Epstein files have been released, claiming they have fulfilled the obligations under the Epstein Transparency Act. Included in the letter is also a list of roughly 300 prominent individuals whose names appear in the Epstein files. The list includes government officials and others the Justice Department classifies as politically exposed persons.
But Congress wasn't buying her claims. The files she released were so heavily redacted that it left huge sections blacked out, and critical names were missing. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle kept pushing back, saying it looked suspicious, like there was still more being hidden. Bondi stubbornly insisted that everything legally required had been released and nothing was being withheld. But then, at a follow-up hearing, a Republican lawmaker who also happens to be a former prosecutor came prepared to debunk her claims.
A witness who called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, because I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI's Threat Operations Center.
He brought with him internal Department of Justice inventories, oversight correspondence, and specific references to documents that Bondi had failed to provide in front of Congress and all the cameras. He methodically went through them. We're talking about an 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York, a draft indictment from Florida aimed at Epstein's co-conspirators, and internal emails discussing why certain individuals weren't charged. All of this was mentioned in earlier litigation and internal records, all of which were required under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, but were nowhere to be found in Bondi's release.
Representative Ro Khanna accusing the DOJ of purposefully muddying the waters, writing on X, to have Janis Joplin, who died when Epstein was 17, in the same list as Larry Nassar, who went to prison for the sexual abuse of hundreds of young women and child pornography, with no clarification of how either was mentioned in the files, is absurd.
What's wild is that this lawmaker didn't just claim these documents existed. He proved it with specific case files and internal inventories that showed the DOJ had cataloged them, but chose not to include them in the public release. So Bondi couldn't say she didn't know about them or that they weren't important. She basically got caught lying to Congress about having released everything. And this wasn't just some Democrat trying to score political points. No, it was a Republican, someone who you think would be on her side, but he was so fed up with the cover-up that he laid it all out for everyone to see. As for Bondi, she didn't have a solid comeback. She attempted to argue that some documents were protected under deliberative process privilege, a legal shield for internal government discussions. But here's the kicker. The Transparency Act specifically overrides those protections for the Epstein files, stating that internal memos and emails must be made public.
The president to work out a deal from people who are his subordinates under his unitary executive theory to get money in one of these cases.
I'm not going to discuss pending litigation.
Okay, so theoretically you're saying because his privacy rights were violated in that tax case, and they were. I'm with the president on that. I mean, his Mar-a-Lago thing is ridiculous, but there's no doubt that his tax returns, despite the fact that he promised to release them.
It's honestly hard to believe she thought that would fly. It's pretty wild to see how Bondi is trying to dodge responsibility. The law clearly states that prosecutors need to explain why they didn't charge certain people. So she can't really hide behind the deliberative process anymore.
Do you even know who Chase Mulligan is? You're so obsessed with, you
Okay,
don't, do you?
I'm going to teach you the rules again. You're the Attorney General of the United States. We have rules here.
You're obsessed with him.
You're the Attorney General of the United States.
With
And the rules.
obsessed with Donald Trump. You
No.
have Trump derangement syndrome.
Mr. Chairman,
Chase
I'd like my time
Mulligan will be
restored. I'd
sentenced
like my
next
time
week
restored.
in your district. In your district, and
Stop
you
the
don't
clock.
even know about it, about keeping children
belongs
safe
to
from
the gentleman.
online.
Deep down, she knows that protection is stripped away, but she's still grasping at straws with excuses because she's got little left to work with. This new information pretty much blows her entire defense strategy to bits. For weeks now, she's been telling everyone, from Congress to the public, that everything has been released, claiming total transparency. Anyone raising concern, she insists, is just being political. But guess what? We now have clear evidence that she wasn't being truthful. There are specific documents she did not release, and she totally knew they existed. To make matters worse, a member from her own party has called her out publicly for it. This really strengthens the case against Bondi for contempt. Previously, she could argue that the situation was complex and that she was doing her best. But now Congress can point to direct examples where she misrepresented what she had actually released. This isn't just about compliance anymore. This is about obstruction. The stakes are enormous because if Bondi is concealing these documents, what else is she hiding? I mean, are there more memos, emails, or draft indictments out there? How many more names are being protected, and who are they? Apparently, the document she's holding back could shed light on why certain associates of Epstein weren't charged. That suggests there were individuals who prosecutors considered charging, but ultimately decided against, and Bondi has the memos that explain why. This is exactly the kind of transparency Congress and the public are demanding, and she's the one standing in the way. As a result, the pressure on her is mounting. The contempt proceedings that were already in motion have gained serious momentum because Congress can now highlight her specific lies. They can illustrate how she misled them and argue that her ongoing refusal to hand over these documents constitutes willful obstruction that deserves serious consequences. Think daily fines, detention, even impeachment is back on the table. What's really significant here is that she can't hide behind the "it's just politics" excuse anymore. A Republican prosecutor has exposed her, meaning her own party is turning against her. That amplifies the challenges she's facing both politically and legally. Now, let's take a closer look at the specific documents she's hiding and why it's such a crucial situation. The Epstein Files Transparency Act aimed to pull back the curtain on investigative documents such as police reports and witness statements, but it was more than just that. It specifically mandated the Department of Justice to share internal documents that explained their prosecutorial decisions. This included why certain individuals were investigated, why some faced charges while others did not, what evidence prosecutors had, and the legal theories they pondered. That's the kind of information Pam Bondi has been keeping under wraps. One major piece that's notably missing is an 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York. This memo is a deep dive by SDNY prosecutors into the Epstein case, providing analysis and recommendations on who should face charges. Such memos are gold because they detail the evidence the prosecutors had, the potential charges considered, and the rationale behind their choices. In Epstein's case, this document would also point to others who might have been involved, like associates, enablers, or even clients, all of which would be laid out in that prosecution memo. We know this memo is real since it's been mentioned in court filings related to civil cases connected to Epstein, and it has been cited by lawyers representing victims. Judges have recognized it, which means Bondi can't simply claim it's non-existent or just a figment of imagination. The memo is out there. The DOJ has it, and Bondi has opted not to disclose it. House Judiciary Democrats have been pushing for this document for weeks, yet Bondi keeps sidestepping the issue. She neither confirms nor denies having it and refuses to comment directly, which clearly signals that she's hiding something. Another important document that's unaccounted for is a draft indictment from Florida targeting Epstein's conspirators. This, too, has been confirmed through court references and internal DOJ records. A draft indictment suggests that prosecutors had progressed far enough in their investigation to formulate formal charges against specific individuals. They had named certain conspirators, outlined the criminal activities, and were preparing to take things to a grand jury. But then something must have caused the indictment to be shelved. Whether it was political pressure, a deal, or interference from someone influential remains a mystery. However, that draft indictment could have revealed who those conspirators were and what charges they were set to face. This situation is really significant. So, it turns out that if prosecutors had been set to charge some associates of Epstein, but then decided not to, the public absolutely deserves to know who those associates are and the reasons behind not prosecuting them. It's quite possible that factors like wealth, political ties, or connections to powerful individuals played a role in their protection. There's a draft indictment that could clarify all this, yet Bondi is holding on to it. Now, there's a law called the Transparency Act, and it specifically demands the release of such documents, but Bondi has been keeping it under wraps. When she was questioned about it during a hearing, her answers were anything but clear. On top of that, there's a third category of documents that are missing: internal emails from the Department of Justice discussing prosecution decisions. A Republican lawmaker brought this to light, revealing that there are extensive email threads among DOJ officials, FBI agents, and prosecutors regarding the Epstein investigation and related cases. These emails would shed light on the internal discussions about who to charge, the evidence they had, the hurdles they faced, and possibly who was pressuring them not to prosecute certain individuals. This kind of transparency was exactly what the Transparency Act aimed to bring to light. However, Bondi has been hiding behind something called deliberative process privilege to keep these emails secret. This legal doctrine typically protects internal government conversations, allowing officials to have honest discussions without the fear of everything being made public. Usually, that's a valid protection. But Congress specifically designed the Transparency Act to override that privilege when it comes to Epstein's files. The law clearly states that internal memos, emails, and notes must be released, even if they would typically be protected. Congress wanted to ensure that the full truth came out. So Bondi can't legally use this deliberative process privilege to conceal these emails. The statute directly overrules it, yet she's still attempting to keep them under wraps. She's arguing that some internal conversations should stay confidential, which goes against what the law explicitly says. When the Republican prosecutor challenged her during the hearing, citing the exact language of the statute, she didn't provide a solid answer. Instead, she kept insisting that the DOJ is abiding by the law and safeguarding sensitive information, but that's simply not what the law permits. The law mandates full disclosure, and she's not following it. Now let's dive into the redactions. So it turns out there's a lot of confusion surrounding the files released by Pam Bondi. The issue is that these files are heavily redacted with giant black boxes covering names and entire sections blurred out, leaving us missing key details. When Congress questioned the extent of these redactions, Bondi said it was to protect victims' privacy and keep ongoing investigations safe. However, legal experts argue that this excuse doesn't hold up when you see how much information is being withheld. It's totally reasonable to keep victim names confidential, but The names of perpetrators and their associates shouldn't be hidden. That goes against the whole idea of transparency. What's really striking is that lawmakers who have access to the unredacted files know that the names being concealed aren't just victims. Al Jazeera reported that at least 6 well-known names were taken out of documents that Congress members ended up mentioning in public. These figures are tied to Epstein's network, people who were either involved or had knowledge of what was going on. Bondi's reasoning for keeping those names under wraps. She claims it's to protect their reputations or because they haven't been charged with anything. But the Transparency Act clearly states otherwise. The law requires that names of individuals investigated or linked to Epstein be released regardless of whether they face charges or not. What adds another layer of suspicion is that Bondi did present a list of about 340 names that are mentioned in the files. But honestly, that list is pretty much useless without any context. It doesn't specify how each person is connected to Epstein, whether they are victims, witnesses, associates, or clients. Just a bunch of names with no explanations. Critics argue that this was done on purpose. Bondi can claim she followed the law by releasing names, but without the context and details she's holding back, those names don't carry any weight. It's like a facade of transparency while still keeping the crucial information hidden. A Republican prosecutor pointed this out during a hearing, saying that Bondi is playing games with her words. She's claiming to release everything while keeping the essential documents that actually clarify what went down. He emphasized that this is exactly the type of cover-up the Transparency Act was intended to avoid. Congress foresaw that the Department of Justice might try to drop certain information while concealing key parts, which is why they crafted such clear rules about releasing internal memos and emails. The situation has taken a serious turn for Pam Bondi. She was trying to play it cool with the Department of Justice, but now she's in hot water. It's interesting to see that even Republicans are starting to call her out publicly, not just the Democrats. The prosecutor who put her on blast is actually a conservative, someone who typically would be on her side. But his frustration with her cover-up was so strong that he decided to reveal the truth, leaving her looking quite embarrassed. That's a big deal when your own party is turning against you. The dynamics have shifted dramatically now that Congress has proof she was misleading them. Before this mess, Bondi could argue that it was all too complicated and that she was doing her best to comply. But now it's clear she lied. They can actually show the documents she claimed didn't exist or weren't required. Evidence that tells a starkly different story. That's not just a disagreement about the law. That's outright obstruction and contempt. It's like handing Congress a stronger case to hold her accountable. And this whole debacle is only adding fuel to the impeachment talk. Lying to Congress isn't child's play. Misleading lawmakers can be serious. Legally speaking, if Bondi keeps refusing to release the documents, despite her exposure, she could be crossing into impeachable territory. The definition of high crimes and misdemeanors includes obstructing Congress and defying federal law, and she's ticking both boxes. As these calls for impeachment escalate, especially with some Republicans joining the chorus, things just got a lot more serious for her. Now, let's rewind a bit to why Bondi's insistence that she had released everything was such a crucial part of her defense. She's been under tremendous pressure to put out the full Epstein files. Congress even set a strict deadline, which she missed. Instead, she dropped only partial files with lots of redactions, prompting lawmakers from both parties to accuse her of protecting the powerful. Her go-to line was always the same. She claimed everything required had been released and that anyone suggesting otherwise was just being political. That was her defense against backlash and a way to escape responsibility. But now that defense has crumbled, leaving her in quite a precarious position. So there's this lawmaker, someone who knows the ins and outs of how the Department of Justice operates, and he showed up at a hearing with some pretty compelling evidence that Pam Bondi's claims were just plain false. He pointed to an 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York, along with a draft indictment from Florida and some internal email chains. All these documents are right there in court records and the DOJ's own records. They clearly exist, and Bondi made the choice not to release them. This pretty much dismantles her entire defense that she had released everything. That's now proven to be a lie. She can't even pretend she didn't know about these documents since they're all cataloged in the DOJ's records. What makes it even worse for her is the fact that this came from someone in her own party. That's a tough blow politically because she could shrug off criticism from Democrats claiming they're just being partisan because she works for Trump. But when it's her fellow Republicans calling her out, it underscores a whole new level of trouble. If the conservatives, who usually have your back, are instead exposing your lies, that signals a serious issue. It paints a picture of a cover-up so blatant that even her party can't defend it. This isolation is dangerous for Bondi. She can't lean on party loyalty anymore, and the consequences of her actions are creeping in on her. Now let's dive into what these missing documents could reveal. The 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York would shed light on what evidence prosecutors had against Epstein and his associates, who was investigated, the potential charges, and why certain individuals were or weren't prosecuted. It's the kind of transparency everyone has been craving because there's always been a suspicion that some powerful people were being protected, names kept out of the spotlight due to wealth or political connections. This prosecution memo could either confirm those suspicions or put them to rest, but Bondi is keeping it under wraps. Now, the draft indictment from Florida is even more explosive. A draft means the prosecutors were ready to go with specific charges. Having gathered evidence and set their legal theories, they were prepared to file formal charges, but then something shifted, and those charges never saw the light of day. The draft would tell us who these people were, what they were going to be charged with, and possibly why the charges got dropped. Was it due to a plea deal, political pressure, or maybe some other reason entirely? So here's the deal. There's this draft indictment that suggests prosecutors think they could prove that more folks were involved in criminal activity alongside Epstein, but Bondi isn't sharing any evidence. It's a bit suspicious, right? These internal emails from the Department of Justice are supposed to reveal what was happening behind the scenes, like who was pushing for charges, who was against it, and whether anyone high up tried to step in and sway the decisions. That's the kind of stuff that can really uncover corruption and cover-ups, which is likely why Bondi wants to keep it under wraps. If those emails reveal that influential people were protecting Epstein's associates, it would blow the lid off a major scandal that could shake up the whole administration. Bondi has been hiding behind this thing called deliberative process privilege, arguing that these internal discussions should stay confidential so that prosecutors can do their jobs without interference. But here's the twist. Congress crafted the Transparency Act to specifically override that privilege for Epstein-related files. The law mandates that all those internal documents, like emails and memos, need to be released, even if they're usually protected. It's almost like they anticipated that the DOJ would try to hide behind that excuse, and they made sure to eliminate it in the law. When a Republican prosecutor pointed this out during a hearing, Bondi didn't have much to say in response. She just kept claiming that the DOJ is following the law, but the law clearly indicates she isn't. Now let's dive into the implications for the contempt proceedings against her. Before this information came to light, it seemed like a nebulous case for contempt. Sure, Congress could argue that Bondi missed the deadline to release everything, but she could easily say she had released a lot and that the compliance was tricky. It felt like a classic he said, she said situation. But now Congress has solid proof to back their claims. They can point to specific documents that Bondi insisted she released but didn't, showing that she misled them about what was actually compliant. This isn't just a matter of interpretation anymore. It's more like she's lying to Congress. That definitely strengthens their case for contempt. The tough measures that were discussed as options are now looking much more likely to be put into action. Since Congress can back up their arguments with evidence of Bondi's falsehoods, they can make a strong case that she isn't merely failing to comply. It's becoming quite a mess for Pam Bondi, isn't it? She's trying to mislead Congress about the information she's supposed to release, and that's not just a little oversight. This kind of behavior could lead to serious penalties like daily fines or even detention. The potential consequences are hefty, especially since a Republican is the one revealing her misleading claims. it's going to make it way tougher for her supporters to argue that this is simply partisan bickering. Let's not forget that misleading Congress is no small matter. It's potentially a criminal offense. We're talking about obstruction of Congress and making false statements to federal officials here. Even if it doesn't fit neatly into the criminal box, it certainly gives grounds for impeachment. High crimes and misdemeanors cover things like abusing one's office and obstructing congressional oversight. And Bondi seems to be ticking both those boxes. She's clearly using her role as Attorney General to keep information that Congress wanted under wraps, while lying about it. That's classic impeachable conduct. Now, with Republicans stepping up to criticize her, impeachment is looking increasingly feasible. But here's the kicker. Bondi is working for Trump. The file she's refusing to release might be protecting someone close to him. Maybe Trump himself, his major donors, or political allies. Who knows exactly, because she's not letting anyone see those documents. The fact that she's risking contempt, impeachment, and even jail to keep those files secret shows just how important they are to whoever she's shielding. This goes beyond just Bondi. It reaches up to Trump. She wouldn't be defying Congress and risking her career unless Trump was giving her the green light. So now it's about what Trump knows and who he's protecting. There's a whole lot of speculation about why those Epstein files are so dangerous that his attorney general is willing to break the law to keep them under wraps. As more details come to light, the connections to Trump will become obvious, and that's bound to create some serious political headaches for him. Voters will definitely want to know why he's so keen on protecting people associated with Epstein and what his link to them is. To wrap things up, Bondi's defense just crumbled spectacularly. She insisted she released everything, but a Republican prosecutor has blown that claim out of the water. Now she's facing some heavy consequences, including potential fines and impeachment. Whatever she's hiding is now under a spotlight, and it's looking pretty grim for her. There's been a lot of talk lately about some associates of Epstein who haven't faced any charges, and people really want to know who they are, what evidence exists against them, and why those decisions were made to let them off the hook. It's pretty clear that the public is craving some transparency on this issue, but it seems like Pam Bondi is doing her best to keep everything under wraps. Now, Congress is stepping in, ready to impose some serious penalties, leaving Bondi with fewer and fewer options to avoid accountability.